and also Mr. Guna Mapuri. There was also the appointment of the following persons to the board of directors of the Jamaica International Financial Services Authority for the period of 2 years with effect from May 8, 2023 to May 7, 2025. Chairman, Mr. Stephen Gooden, Deputy Chairman, Mr. Peter Golson, and members, Mr. Eric Crawford, Ms. Shillette Cox, Mr. Norman Reed, Miss Melinda Wallace, Mr. L. Robert Honeygan, Miss Kelly Dawn Hamilton, Mr. Mark Gale, Mr. Julian Mayer, Mr. Philip Harrison, and Miss Opal Wilson. There are also ex officio members on the board, which include Mr. Richard Biles, the governor of the Bank of Jamaica, Mr. Kenneth Baker, Executive Director, Financial Services Commission, Miss Marlene Aldred, who is the Solicitor General. That's Miss Marlene Aldred, KC, Solicitor General in the Attorney General's chamber. There was also the appointment of persons to the Electricity Appeal Tribunal for a period of 2 years from the 15th of May 2023 to the 14th of May 2025. That was the Honorable Miss Justice Retired Ingrid Mangatal, who is the chairperson, Dr. Adrian Stokes, and Miss Shirley Ann Eaton. We also had the appointment of the following persons to the eGov Board of Directors from the period the 8th of May to the 24th to the 20th of May 2024, Miss Grace Lindo, Miss Sherry Jones, Mr. Owen Ellington, and Major Sean Brand. We also had the appointment of Miss Melissa Tracy Ann Berry to the Board of Directors for E-Learning Jamaica Limited, and the Board of Directors of the Universal Service Fund for the same period. There was also the appointment of members of the board or the management committee of the Falmouth Hospital for a period of 3 years from the 15th of May 2023 to the 14th of May 2026. That's Chairman Mr. Kenneth Grant, Mrs. Patricia Greaves Silvero, Mr. Karen Young, Miss Dion Campbell, Mr. Jonathan Bartley, and Miss Judith Moore. Cabinet gave approval also for the Management Committee for the Cornwall Regional Hospital from the 15th of May 2023 to the 14th of May 2026. Chairman Mr. David Baugh, Miss Odette Subram Dyer, Reverend Paul Robinson, Miss Suzette Ramdani Linton, Justice of the Peace, Miss Patrice Ricketts, Justice of the Peace, Miss Simone Matheson, and Mr. Mark McGann. We also had the appointment of Mr. Christopher Weems Stone to the Board of Directors of TPDCO with effect from the 15th of May 2023 to the 1st of November 2024, when the tenure of the board will expire. There was also appointments to the Anti-Doping Disciplinary Panel from the 15th of May 2023 to the 8th of May 2025, and that's Mrs. Meg Georgia Gibson Henlin, King's Counsel, as chairperson, Miss Catherine Minto as vice chairperson. We also had the approval for members of the Board of Directors for the Trade Board from the 15th of May 2023 to the 20th of March 2024, and that's Miss Dane Ashpole as deputy chairperson and Mrs. Nicole Chang. There was also approval for the Board of Directors of JAMPRO with chairperson Miss Patricia Francis CD and deputy chairperson Mr. Ian Levy. We also had addition of Mr. Yoni Epstein, Mr. Max Jardim, Mr. Delana Seavright, Dr. Tanisha Ingleton, Mr. Vinnie Walia, Mr. Christopher McPherson, Miss Opal White, Mr. Kevin O'Brien Chang, Mr. L. Robert Honeygan, Miss Michelle Law, Miss Devita McLaren, and Miss Joan Archibald. There's also the appointment of members of the Board of Directors for the Jamaica Business Development Corporation with chairperson Miss Stephanie Sterling and deputy chairperson Stephen Fong Yi. We will give you further on the other members of that board. As it relates to approvals, We had the approval of the 26th regular meeting of the Council of Foreign Community Relations, COFCOR, which was from the 16th to the 17th of May in Jamaica, as well as the 11th United Kingdom Caribbean Forum, was on the 18th of May, and the inaugural Jamaica UK Strategic Dialogue, which was on the 19th of May. There was also overseas travel approval for a delegation by the Minister of Foreign Affairs to the city of Antigua in the Republic of Guatemala to participate in the 28th Ordinary Meeting of the Ministerial Council of the ACS to be held on the 11th of May. So this has passed. And there was also approval for the Minister of Health, which is now happening, to attend the 35th Commonwealth Health Ministers Meeting on the 20th of May, the 8th World Heart Summit on the 20th of May, the 76th World Health Assembly from the 21st to the 30th of May. So some of you may notice the Minister of Health putting out postings from these events over the last several days. There was also a delegation from the Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce to the United States to seek foreign investment opportunities in Miami and Atlanta, and also opportunities for expansion of Jamaica's logistics industry from the 21st of May to the 26th of May, just about happening now. There were several contracts that were approved. There was an award of contract by Petrojam Limited for the procurement of F2 burner management systems. And in keeping with the endorsement of the Public Procurement Commission, this contract was awarded to the tune of $632,000 to Zico Inc. There was also another contract by Petrojam for chemical supplies and services for refinery processes and utilities for the period of 3 years. And this was approved by the Public Procurement Commission, and it was to the tune of $2,051,000 to Vilio Water Technologies and Solutions, formerly Suez Water Technologies and Solutions, a United States company. There was also we reviewed recommendations of the Independent Commission of the Judiciary, which outlined in its report a revision of emoluments of the judiciary and recommendations from the Ministry of Finance. And some of you may have noticed Dr. Clark speaking about that review in Parliament. There was also the award of contract by the Planning Institute of Jamaica for the development and execution of a two-pronged communication plan that targets the main audience impacted by business reforms and the wider public. And this approval was to the tune of, I think, $132 million to Engine Room Limited. And penultimately, I think, there was approval for the hosting of the 26th meeting of the CARICOM Standing Committees of Chiefs of Immigration and Controllers of Customs at the Montego Bay Conference Center, and this took place between the 16th and 18th of May. And also approval for Jamaica co-hosting the Caribbean Nation Security Conference 2023 to be held in Montego Bay the 5th to the 19th of June. And this would be under the theme strengthening regional security through informed action. And that's essentially the decisions of cabinet over the last, I think, 2 sittings. And with that, and I noticed that our minister is a bit delayed, we will be willing to take some questions until his arrival. Do we have any questions? Siobhan from Nationwide. Good morning.
Thank you. My first question is regarding the Prime Minister's pay adjustment. I'm curious, is it binding on all future holders of the office, or is it a specific one-off adjustment?
All right, well, I'll have to get some more details on that, but my impression was that it's not the Andrew Holness salary that has been reduced is that of the Prime Minister. So logically, I think it would be binding. But let me get clarity, I suspect I would speak to Dr. Clark about it. But I believe that it is binding both past and present, because pensions are also connected to the salary. So past and present and future would be tied to it. All right.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Jovan Johnson from the Gleaner.
Morning, Mr. Johnson.
Thanks. Minister, regarding the same salary issues for the political directorate, I'm wondering, were there options presented to Cabinet in relation to the increases for the members of the political directorate, such as a midpoint, for example, of the scale involving permanent secretaries? And if there were, why the highest?
All right. So the first thing is I cannot discuss anything that happens in cabinet unless it's in the minutes. So discussions are cabinet are privileged. But I can say this to you, and I've said it like several times. The historical fact is that cabinet ministers' salaries are tied to that of permanent secretaries. That is not something that is new. It has been going on for at least 50 years. I was listening to Helen Davis White, and I think on your station this morning, Siobhan, and she explained the process. So I think a reputable audit company did a audit of the 500 points in public sector salaries to see how they could be adjusted to be more in line with the private sector. It was known by the union leaders that minister salaries are tied to permanent secretary salaries. And it was also known by many that when the audit compared a similar position in the private sector to that of a permanent secretary, it required a particular adjustment. To your specific question as it relates to where on the scale they fall. So ministers do not move. So the minute you put a minister on a scale, we do not get increments. We do not get adjustments in our salaries based on what permanent secretaries would get. So if you are saying that a permanent secretary can move on the scale and a minister cannot move, then obviously you'd have to put a minister at a point where no matter how much the permanent secretary moves within a period, they will not be able to overtake. So Dr. Clark said in Parliament that the minister is placed $1 above the upper point of a permanent secretary. So I'm very fascinated. I'm wondering if it is that persons do not remember that he was made very clear that it is not. So if you put a minister, if a permanent secretary is at 0.6, and the assumption is that a permanent secretary is paid $1 less per se, or minister is paid $1 more, and you put a permanent secretary at 0.6 and you put the minister at 0.7, within a year, that permanent secretary is now above the minister. And the principle is that the minister cannot move on the scale. We are one of the few public sector workers who, once our salary is set, it is set for the last time it was 15 years, right? And I don't suspect that it will be moving anytime soon, probably for the next 30 years based on everything that we're hearing. Does that answer your question, Jovan? But let me make it clear again. So we did not get an opportunity to discuss our salaries. There was no negotiation. There was no to and froing like other union people. We are not unionized. What we were told is that the principle is that you're $1 above permanent secretaries. Most of us didn't even know what a permanent secretary was getting because we were not party to negotiations and those things were not published, right? So we did not know in many cases how much we were gonna get until it was announced. MPs did not know how much they were gonna get until it was announced, right? And that's one of the interesting things about this conversation, where something has been happening for 50 years and it happens now without our input, but we are chastised for it. It is an automatic thing. And the question is, the logic of the Ministry of Finance was that this is the standard, we're not changing anything. As a matter of fact, they reduced the Prime Minister from 30% above to 25% above, right? Because I think they were adjusting based on some formula that they had. But the question I keep asking those who are questioning is, should permanent secretaries be paid more than ministers? And nobody's yet to answer that question. And it's a very important question. Both permanent secretary and minister are almost equal. One is policy and one is execution. Do you pay your chief financial officer more than you pay your CEO? So we have engaged in this public sector reform, and every single state employee has gotten increases at various points. Some got 30, 20, 40, 100. But there's one group of people who are not entitled to an increase, and that is the politician. That is the reasoning we're having. We're politicians, we can take the hit, and we try to explain as much as possible, but the country has to make a decision as to what kind of compensation should politicians get and where on the scales should they land. Because in 15 years' time, this conversation is going to come up again, and we're going to have to make a decision again. I would not be here in 15 years' time, but the next generation is going to have to make that decision.
Minister Arthur Hall from the
Morning,
Jamaica.
Arthur.
Just to follow up to the answers that you gave. Firstly, to Chevron, the issue is the Prime Minister's salary has moved. This Prime Minister has decided that he will not take the increase.
Right.
Are you saying as a statement of fact that the increase won't apply for former Prime Ministers whose salary is now indexed to the salary of the Prime Minister? Is that
I'm saying that as a fact.
Okay. And secondly, Minister, in your response to Jovan, you said you put them on a scale. The permanent secretaries were put at 4 on a scale of 13, but the ministers moved to top of the scale at 13. Any particular reason why we could have fit the ministers in at 6 or 7?
Because within 3 years, the permanent secretaries would pass him. And I have Minister Clark here, and I noticed some of your questions are very technical. I don't want to put him on the spot as he walks in, but I just want to notify him that the issue that Jovan is asking is why put the ministers at X point in the scale and permanent secretaries at Y. And I suspect that you have you spoke about it in Parliament, so you have a good explanation for it. You may come. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister, and good morning, everyone. I heard that question as I was walking in. The framework that has been applied for the compensation of parliamentarians and of ministers is the identical framework that has been in place for the better part of 37 years. And that framework, as written in an independent report by Douglas Fletcher back in 1989, which endorsed and which recommended what came out of the Ron Sasser report, originally done in 1980 and adopted in 1986 by the Standing House of Representatives, was that the minister's pay was to be determined by an amount of $52 above the highest level permanent secretary pay. And that has been the framework in place. And the principle behind that framework has been to ensure that to keep the principle of having persons who are supervised by other persons, have that pay relationship is such that the supervisor is paid more than the supervisee. And at $52, it was $1 per week. It was symbolically to be ahead. And indeed, that principle has existed for 50 years. That principle goes back to the Ashenheim Report of 1972, which was implemented, I believe, in 1973. In 1973, how the principle was implemented, the principle of having a supervisor paid more than a supervisee, it was $1 per month in 1972. So it was $12 a year more than the highest level of the permanent secretary. And in 1986, that was changed to $52 more. Now, I've heard the question about the scale. We have expanded the scale, and it has 13 points in it. And the nature of the conversion is that most people would convert into the beginning ranks of the scale. However, there are those who, because of the compensation, the nature of the compensation before, and our condition that everyone receives a minimum level of net compensation increase, there are some who would have been moved way up on the scale to accommodate that. So if we had set it at levels that you're suggesting, there would be the case of a permanent secretary getting more than a minister. And again, one, we're sticking to the exact framework that's been in place for 37 years. And two, from a practical point of view, because of detailed mechanics that I probably wouldn't want to sort of expose individual sort of compensation, in order to we're set it at a level that ensures that that principle is upheld.
Good morning, Minister Clark. A question regarding the Ernst & Young assessment. Would it be possible to make that document public, considering the issues of surrounding transparency? And as Minister Morgan had said earlier, you'll be the best person to ask. The arrangement with the Prime Minister's adjustment, is it binding on all future holders of the office? And based on what you said about reporting to the CEO, people who essentially are paid more, the Prime Minister's pay will be now capped at 9 million, and MP's pay will be moved to 12 million. Does that mean all holders of the office are essentially taking a pay cut upon taking that office?
Okay. So let me just back up a bit. Ernst & Young, the government of Jamaica, in undertaking this reform, entered into a contract with Ernst & Young, and Ernst & Young, we engaged them at the level of Jamaica, Trinidad, London, and they even had partners from New York. And they'd have engaged in a broad study of the compensation market in Jamaica. Several hundred jobs in the public service were benchmarked against their private sector equivalent. And I should start by saying several hundred jobs, or jobs were scored or evaluated using a common evaluation framework. And those jobs then benchmarked against the jobs in the private sector in a very scientific way. We then looked at what the government could afford, i.e. benchmarking to market meant we couldn't afford to go benchmark directly to market, but benchmark to a particular quartile of the market. All jobs are benchmarked in that way. Those reports, as far as I'm aware, have been made available to the union. Certainly the ones that I have, the unions have. So the report is in, if you want to call that the public domain, it is in the public domain. And it is that scoring and benchmarking that has informed the public sector compensation restructuring. But let me just, one of the features and the characteristics of wage settlements over the past 10 years is that, which is not commonly reported and is a feature of certainly central government wage settlement, is that because have been modest, there have been efforts or practical implementation where the jobs at the top of the scale received less in percentage terms than those in the, at other ends. And over time, jobs at the top as a result moved further and further away on a relative basis. And what the review sought to do was to align all jobs in relation to themselves and in relation to the Jamaican market. And in addition, recall that jobs in public bodies, similar jobs in public bodies, were for a long time remunerated at levels that exceeded the corresponding jobs in central government. And here I'm not talking about the commercial public bodies, Petrojam, NHT, Port Authority, and one or two others, which you expect to be high. I'm talking about public bodies that don't perform commercial functions, that are on the consolidated fund. We had a situation emerging where there's a divergence in compensation, which was unhealthy because it meant that could not attract persons, certainly in technical and leadership areas, to the central government, to ministries, for example. And what the compensation restructuring has sought to do has been to align jobs across the public service according to an evaluation of those jobs using the exact same evaluation matrix. There might be more I want to say on this topic later, but with respect to the question you asked about the Prime Minister, I mean, I think you can answer that question for yourself. In terms of the second part of your question, you don't need me to answer that. The first part, I think you asked whether or not it can be. Well, what the Prime Minister asked is that the scale for Prime Minister remain as it is. So that is the salary scale. This is not an individual Andrew Holness decision. He has asked that the salary scale for Prime Minister remain unchanged.
So it's cannot be adjusted by any future Prime Minister.
No, I think the Prime Minister has asked that the scale be unchanged.
On that level, as part of the compensation review, the allowances to members of parliament and ministers were rolled into the new package, with the Prime Minister indicating that it should stay and the Prime Minister's salary should not move. Does that mean that he continues to get the allowances before the adjustment?
The Prime Minister has asked that the compensation scale for the job of Prime Minister remain as is. And I think that scale is public and all information associated with it is public.
A follow-up to what you said earlier, Dr. Clark, and then one to Minister Morgan after. In relation to the job descriptions and the performance evaluation mechanism that the government is going to proceed, Minister Morgan earlier pointed out that ministers' salary typically don't move after they are adjusted, which is why they are placed at the highest point on the scale. But with the performance evaluation to come, surely that practice will change based on the performance of ministers. So how will that be rolled into this?
Yeah, and that's why we've given ourselves the time to arrive at a satisfactory conclusion, because there's a lot of work to be done to finalize the performance compensation mechanism in the public service. And you will understand that a performance compensation system only works if it cascades down. If let's use a private sector analogy, if the CEO is on a performance contract, but the persons who report to the CEO are not, and the persons who report to them are not, then it's unlikely that that performance contract will have the benefits that it would be designed to have. So when we implement performance pay, it has to be done across the board at the same time. And there are lots of questions that will arise. This is not something that we'll do on our own. We'll do it in conjunction with our partners in the union, and be transparent about it as we are in this process.
Minister, the government keeps pointing to the Sasso report, the Fletcher report, the Ashadine report, but the latest review of the compensation for members of the parliamentary directorate was done by Oliver Clark. And one of the 40 recommendations in that review was that you de-link the $1 between the permanent secretaries and the ministers. I notice you have not raised that in all your explanation of as to
No,
where
in
we are.
my address to Parliament, I did point that out, that we've had these independent reviews of compensation for the political directorate in 1972, we had it in 1980, we had it in 1989, and we had the 2003 report by Oliver Clark in 2003. Unlike the Ashenheim, the Sasso, and the Fletcher, the Clark report was not implemented at all. So in alluding to the Fletcher, the Sasso, and the Ashenheim, I'm pointing out the benchmark against permanent secretaries that was recommended in those reports and which has been adopted by government continuously since then. The Oliver Clark report did recommend that delinking, but it also recommended standards that could see pay go higher. So recall that the context in which the Oliver Clark report was drafted was not a context in which we were adjusting compensation across the entire public service at the same time. It was addressing parliamentary pay and ministerial pay in itself. And at that time, had the Oliver Clark report had it been implemented, pay for ministers would have been not $52 higher than permanent secretaries. He wasn't saying de-link it to make it lower. The effect of de-linking it and the implementation of what the Oliver Clark report recommended would have had the result at that time of increasing ministers' pay above what permanent secretaries were earning.
Minister, I just wanted to be definitive. Did your ministry propose options for the increases in salaries for the political directorate?
The ministry would have brought, or as I said, the framework for compensation has not changed. The ministry would not on its own suggest a different framework. If there were to be a different framework, it would have to come from an independent source. So all the ministry did was to apply the existing framework to a new compensation spine.
Thank you, Dr. Clark. You had a question for me.
Why shouldn't Jamaicans believe the government is being reactive in the Prime Minister's announcement of the performance appraisal mechanism in light of the promise by then opposition leader, now Prime Minister Andrew Holness, in 2016?
Because things don't happen immediately. The nature of government requires wide consultations. It requires adjustments of systems and processes. We, the members of the cabinet, myself and Dr. Clark, and particularly Dr. Clark, have been on a campaign of accountability. You've seen work that has been done with the boards. You've seen where politically connected persons like councillors and senators will no longer be allowed. I would like Dr. Clark to speak about this because it's a very important point that you're raising.
Yeah, I would encourage members of the media, members of the public, not to see this reform in isolation. First of all, it's a reform for compensation in the public service overall. Secondly, it comes with other reforms that are taking place at the same time. We have reformed the process for the nomination, selection, and appointment of persons to public body boards. Just last week, and I don't see it reported in the media, even though there's a media event, just last week, we unveiled the public platform by which persons can nominate themselves for consideration for service on the board of a public body. Once that database is completed, no one will be able to serve on a public body board who did not go through that nomination process. So let's back up a bit. what we're doing is we are streamlining the nomination, selection, and appointment process for public body boards. Today, people are appointed because they know a minister, somebody talked to somebody, etc. With the new system, every person who is appointed will go through exactly the same process. It is a game changer. There's a online platform. We will invite the professional associations, the General Legal Council, the Institute of Chartered Accountants, the Institute of Engineers. We'll invite the political parties. We'll invite the business associations, the Small Business Association, JCC, and other civic groups to submit or to nominate persons for service on public body boards using that online platform. That online platform asks people to provide their name, their obviously educational backgrounds, their experience, their qualifications, and so forth. And for those who want to be considered on sensitive boards, they'll have to indicate that they're willing to undergo a due diligence check. Very importantly, members of the political directorate will no longer be able to be considered for nomination, selection, or appointment to the boards of public bodies once this database is completed. And to be very specific, councillors who today are able to serve on the boards of public bodies, senators who are today able to serve on the boards of public bodies, once this database is complete and the system up and running, that will no longer be the case. So what we are trying to do, ladies and gentlemen, we are modernizing the Jamaican state. And a process of modernizing the Jamaican state is to ensure that the governance of our public bodies who administer $542 or thereabouts $billion of expenditure and $580 billion of revenue, public bodies have over $1 trillion of assets, that process is professionalized, that it is transparent, that the process is the same for everyone, and that we disband the structural conflict that exists where members of the political directorate, especially elected members, have so far been able to serve on the boards of public bodies. This was launched last week and the website was unveiled. I would encourage you to check it out. Members of the media can nominate, we'll go to the PAJ, or if that's not a conflict. But it's open, and the idea is that everyone in the future, everyone that you see on the board would have gone through the exact same process. And after nomination, what happens is there's a directory of eligible persons eligible for public body appointment. That database is then used in the selection process when vacancies arise. And remember, vacancies can arise, change in a minister, change in a government, and a couple other reasons. Firstly, 30% of the old board has to be retained, and each board has a competency profile that describes the competencies that board needs. The administrators of the system will produce a directory of the persons who meet those competency profiles, and the selection will have to be from among this group or from among this directory, and an appointing authority will make the appointment. This is a groundbreaking change, ladies and gentlemen, and what I want you to see the reforms across that we are putting in place as complementary reforms that are designed to improve the governance of our country. In separating members of local government from service on the public bodies, and in recognition of the fact that these are members who we task with the responsibility of approving multi-billion dollar buildings, multi-billion dollar hotels, Right? This is the responsibility of local government. We have to ensure that the remuneration is consistent with the responsibilities and hence the reforms at the local government level that we've undertaken.
Like to address something, and I want to add to what Dr. Clark was saying. There is this misconception that cabinet ministers, members of parliaments are not held accountable. That is patently not true. The first level of accountability that I, as a member of parliament, have to acquiesce to is accountability to the people who vote for us and those who even didn't vote for us in our constituencies. There have been many cases where MPs who did not perform in strongholds of political parties were voted out by constituents. So this narrative that we see emerging that we were never held accountable for anything is not correct. The second point I want to make, and Minister spoke about the important transformations rewards, is that there are numerous mechanisms in government that holds politicians accountable. You have the Integrity Commission, which holds us accountable financially in terms of assets and liabilities and whether we are illicitly benefiting. You have the FID, you have MOCA, which have been strengthened by this administration. You also have parliamentary committees where ministers have to attend upon these occasions and give explanation as to what it is that we have done in our ministries and why we did it. You have the budgetary process, and people may not remember, but every single minister has to attend Standing Finance Committee every year, and questions are asked by our opposition colleagues and others about what we did in our ministry. Why wasn't this project executed? And this is all public. You also have international agreements that we have signed on that holds us accountable. You have the OGP framework, and I would love, Dr. Clark, if you would speak a little bit about OGP. So in the whole conversation that we're having, there seems to be a lot of miscommunication and disinformation, essentially trying to say that Jamaican politicians are the only people in government who are not accountable to anything. There was an interview this morning, Chevron, on your program, where one of the persons said that the increase went to cabinet's head and they forgot good sense and it blinded us. And I want to emphatically state that, as the minister has outlined, the increase in parliamentary salaries was not a matter that came on the cabinet's agenda for discussion and decision. It was an automatic pegging that has been happening for over 30 years. And I think the minister has said it numerous times. I have said it numerous times, but there seems to be, in the whole conversation, some attempt to ignore the facts that have been presented by us. But I want, Minister, if you could articulate a little bit about the OGPT framework and some of the other accountability agreements that we as a government have signed internationally and locally, Minister.
Yeah, so the government of Jamaica signed on to the open government partnership process. Open government is a multilateral organization consisting of countries around the world who stand up and for open government principles. And the open government process requires the co-creation with civil society of public policy goals. And once that co-creation process is completed, the goals are published and the government, is held to account to accomplish those goals. The first OGP process would have, I'm going to get my dates off here because I was not planning to come and talk about it today. But what out of the OGP process, you get, what happens is that the government interfaces with civil society, with NGOs and other groups, and civil society NGOs propose policy changes that they would like to see be implemented. We had that process. I don't have the dates with me here. And out of that process, a national action plan was developed. And a national action plan has a 2 to 3 year horizon. And the government publishes that national action plan and is then held to account to achieve it. We are in our first cycle of the implementation of this national action plan. And you know, we believe that for the second and future cycles, this is certainly a mechanism for us to deepen governance in Jamaica and to deepen transparency in Jamaica. But again, these are not reported on by the media, but I encourage you to go do your Google searches and check it out. And you see that what we have been doing, we are modernizing governance in Jamaica and taking on initiatives and measures that Jamaica has not previously undertaken. And it builds layers of accountability in our society for which the people of Jamaica are the ultimate beneficiaries.
Hal Shane Burke, Radio Jamaica News. The court had given the government until March 31 to implement proper software to capture and calculate overtime for members of the Jamaica Constabulary Force. Has that yet been done?
1 second, please. Can I borrow Dr. Clark for a minute, please? He has to take a very important phone call. Just give me a second. But you can ask questions going forward.
Sure, all right. What is the legal premise Prime Minister has indicated for fining MPs for absenteeism in Parliament and sittings and deducting salaries from that?
Well, there are different mechanisms you can use to do that. Of course, you can do a statutory action where you pass a law to do it, but there are also voluntary actions that you can do as a political organization to say, for example, if I'm late for cabinet, it's an accepted practice in cabinet that if I'm late, cabinet starts at 10 o'clock. If I'm 5 minutes grace, if I come at 10:06, then I have to pay a fine, which will be donated to charity at the end of the parliamentary year. That's a voluntary thing that every cabinet minister agreed to at the beginning in order to hold us accountable. Similarly, in Parliament, the party to which the Prime Minister is lead and the government, Prime Minister can say to his caucus, we're going to have an agreement that if you are absent from Parliament for an unreasonable reason, you will pay a fine. That is not a difficult thing to do, and it has been done before. There is context to it. Minister, you ready? All right. You're going to respond.
Oh, no, that one. Yeah, so the implementation of the overtime system is a Ministry of National Security issue. And the information I have is that that system is ready to go, is in place. But I would defer to the Minister of National Security to respond to that. I hope you'll respect that.
All right, in terms of the other public sector groups, they have been complaining bitterly. What is the plan to meet with them to discuss the anomalies, discrepancies, and to ferret out what the issues are?
Right. So,
the JTA, the Jamaica, the Police Federation, yeah, those two well, not everybody in particular, but
Yeah.
I don't want to get into.
no, the narrative, you see, this is part of the problem that we're having is that the media has created a narrative and then expects us to live in that narrative when the narrative itself is not representative of the broad reality. That's just a fact. It is the case that there are anomalies, but the review has not been dominated by anomalies. The anomalies are in the minority. The Prime Minister has given a commitment. I have given a commitment that those anomalies will be addressed. I would have said it before. You don't make a transformational change like this. This is not a salary increase. This is a complete transformational change in the compensation framework for over 100,000 persons, 110,000 persons in the public sector. You don't make that kind of transformation without there being anomalies, especially with the complicated nature of the system that we're coming from. I've made myself available, or the Ministry of Finance is available, has been available to meet, to discuss any anomalies. But some of the times, you see some of these, they're more interested in talking to the media than to talking to the Ministry of Finance. I don't think that LaSonia Harrison has to date picked up any kind of correspondence with the Ministry of Finance. All she's out there is talking to the media. So we are here and ready to engage on any anomalies that exist, and we have meetings set up to address some of the systematic issues. Yeah. So today we have a broken performance system in government. Now, this is a topic that can be misinterpreted or can be viewed as controversial, but I want to just ask for your latitude to be able to address it. Many years ago, the government would have implemented a system that involves increments in the public service, where before, I believe the number of increments were 8 in any band. And the idea is that you would move up the increments on the basis of your performance. So you would perform, you'd be at band 1, at increment 1, you'd perform and you'd go to increment 2. You'd be at increment 2, you perform, you go to increment 3. For a number of reasons, including the fact that the government of Jamaica has historically, certainly during the period of macroeconomic distress, been unable to reward or award cost of living adjustments that persons found satisfactory. In effect, not by design, but in effect, the moving up the increment system or the performance system has been in effect, it has had the effect of being a cost of living adjustment, i.e. a system where 80% to 90% of persons are scored as performing at a level that justifies an incremental move. Now, that is not a performance management system. A performance management system is going to lead to differentiated outcomes. It is going to have objective criteria by which persons in jobs can be objectively and transparently assessed. And on that assessment, their persons will be able to move up increments or whatever the performance, whatever the performance reward is that we arrive at with unions. So the 2 points I'd like you to note on performance is one, it only works if it cascades down. You can't have one person at the top on performance, a performance system, and the persons who report in the tree are not on it. You have to have the performance system cascading from the person at the top of a ministry, to the people who report, to the people who report to them, and the people who report to them. And while persons might be responsible for different parts, and the person at the top is rewarded on all of the parts, it has to be consistent and to flow. And what we have today needs radical reform, which is why we have agreed with our partners in unions to sit with them and to design a performance management system for the public service that is fit for purpose. Now, people have concerns, there are a number of concerns. One is, will the government actually put it in place in April 2025? Right? That's a real concern, because here we are saying, look, let's pause on the increments until we can put the performance management system in place, right? For years, we're moving increments and we're not and the people of the country are telling us that they're not getting the performance. That is certainly the message we get from the people of the country. So the idea is to put that on pause while we implement a performance management system that we all can be on and we're all aligned. When there's performance, everybody benefits. Now, the concerns, which are legitimate concerns, are, all right, we've heard this thing before. We've heard government promise to put stuff in place before, and it never happens. Well, I'd give you the comfort that we have taken on, we have stepped up to the plate and taken on a very challenging and difficult reform in the compensation restructuring exercise that members of unions, members of the public service never thought would happen, never thought that a government would be bold enough to take on a reform of this nature. And in the same way we've been bold enough to take this on, we will put in place with our union partners a performance management system within the time frame that we have agreed to. But I understand that. And then the second concern is it going to be fair? How are we going to score, how are you going to have a performance management system in the police? Are you going to have it in the teaching profession? Are you going to have it in the civil service and in the hospitals, right? You know, are we going to have something that's generalized and slapdash? Am I going to be unfairly treated and done? And those, again, I recognize as legitimate and reasonable questions, which is why, again, we need the time to have the discussions and to put it in place. It took us 4 years to put this restructuring of compensation in place, and we're, designating 2 years to put a proper performance management system in place, and one that will differentiate. It doesn't mean that you can be, some people, it has to differentiate for it to be meaningful. It's not going to be the kind of system where every year 100% of people are scored as performing at the highest level. Unless, of course, that'd be great. If that'd be great. It means that Jamaica would be just booming, right?
Minister, firstly, you lamented that there were certain matters that flew under the radar of the media. I'd like to say, in our usual thoroughness, the issues that you raised, Nationwide had carried both of them. So you can rest assured that those issues are not flying under the radar. The next matter, can Jamaicans be forgiven for labeling the government as reactionary when, one, this matter of job descriptions was put forward as a campaign promise of the Wholeness Jamaica's Labour Party 2016. Mr. Wholeness told the country on Monday that this had been settled in 2021, that job descriptions for members of parliament and ministers was something that had been settled in 2021. Yet the matter was not brought to the public till after backlash over the politicians' compensation restructuring. So can Jamaicans be forgiven for viewing that as very reactionary?
Well, we work for the Jamaican people. It's not it's not about forgiving anybody. Jamaican people are entitled to their own opinions and to view matters in the public domain in the way they see fit. So the premise of the question, I think, is off.
I have two questions, one for you and one, please, and for the minister on a separate issue. Minister, Stocks and Securities Limited, any updates you can give us on the investigation? Whilst the matter was in the court from January, the minister spoke very generously on several issues. We at the Gleaner reported that the FSC has determined that Stocks and Securities Limited is insolvent. Is there an update you can give us?
The policy directive remains unchanged. Leave no stone unturned. Pursue this wherever it leads and get international help. We in the political directorate are responsible for policy. and the policy remains unchanged.
And in terms of the changes that you talked about the FSC Act and so on, what's the timeline for those? You've had some-
At the time I mentioned those changes, I gave a timeline of 24 months, which is a tight timeline. It might take a little bit longer than that.
Thank you. And to you, Minister Morgan, we're now mid-May. Is the government still on track, as it indicated, to table the bill for Jamaica to remove the monarchy this month?
Well, I'll answer it by saying that at the beginning of the process, there was a hope that because of the restricted matter that was to be contemplated, which was the Republic, we could, based on the fact that there was consensus nationally that Jamaica should become a republic, that there could have been a tabling of such a bill. However, several persons in the media and civil society said that we're moving too fast. I'm sure you remember. Why are we in such a rush to go from constitutional monarchy to republic? And they called for even wider consultations than has been done for the last 60 odd years. So the Minister of Legal and Constitutional Affairs has been consulting. She had a consultation in Montego Bay. I think she had one in Manchester, and she had a third. She has also been consulting internally, having meetings with various groups and individuals, and the committee continues to meet. Based on all that is happening, Jovan, I don't know if on one hand you say we're moving too fast, you're going to hold us when we have slowed down a bit to accommodate the concerns of those who said we're moving too fast, that we have failed in our commitment to deliver the bill at the timeline that we initially said. Consultation is very important, and especially for a matter like this, which will impact the future of every single Jamaican. And there's a reason why I gave that long run up to answering your question, because what I realize is that a lot of the times when we answer questions and we don't give the context of why things happen, persons may construe different things from the answer. So I don't know if it's going to make it, but if it doesn't make it, there's a reasonable expectation there's a reasonable explanation as to why it has not made it on time. Is that I suspect we may have exhausted our time. I want to say one thing before I leave, and I want to thank the media. We have developed a good culture here at Postcab, a very accommodating and respectful culture, an open culture where we try our best to answer your questions. One of the things I want to mention, and I have been going around the country, testing people about this whole salaries issue. Because as Minister of Information, I have to think about a wide cross-section of what Jamaicans are saying. There are many persons who are uncomfortable with the salaries. A lot of them are uncomfortable because they don't support the government. A lot are uncomfortable because they felt that other sectors should get more. A lot of them are uncomfortable because they don't have the information. But there's also a lot of Jamaicans who are not uncomfortable. We've heard them on social media. We've seen them on the streets. I have myself canvassed numerous persons in my constituency who have a different view. So there is no homogeneity in the conversation about salaries. But one of the things that I want to comment on is that there is almost a homogeneity in the amplification of the one perspective. And I think that as a government, we have to listen to persons. We have to listen to criticisms. We have to listen to persons who support us and who don't support us. And also as a government, we have to, at times, when we make decisions, relook at those decisions and adjust where adjustments needs to be. And I think what the Prime Minister did on Monday is he recognized concerns by a lot of Jamaicans. And though there are many Jamaicans who supported the decision, the Prime Minister's statement was that he needs to keep the country together. And I think that's one of the big things that we can take from what he did. While we may have support at a wide cross-section of Jamaicans, and while we may not have support, the fundamental important thing for our government is to do everything in its power to keep our country together. And it is a commitment that we have made, and it's a commitment that we will continue to make going forward. It is now 9 o'clock, and therein lies the end of our post-cabinet press briefing. I would like to thank members of the media for attending, and I'd also like to appreciate the viewers. We had one of our largest audiences this morning, Dr. Clark. I suspect it wasn't me. So I want to thank the viewers and listeners out there. And I want to also thank our colleagues from GIS, PBCJ, and the Office of the Prime Minister. I see the Director of Communications here as well. Welcome her to PostCap. Until next week, 8 o'clock sharp, thank you very much, and may you have a safe and prosperous day. Thank you very much.